We're looking at Matthew chapter 13. We've had a Christmas time and focused on the Christmas message, and we're going back to our study found in Matthew chapter 13. And we are particularly going to verse 34 and 35, which we were right in the middle of that study. And I want to take you back to that study tonight and look carefully at a couple of things. And it's interesting that if you have paid attention, which probably you haven't, which is okay. I can hardly remember what I say myself. So what we're going to say will be repeating, but the reason it's repeating is because he's repeating. And so you get a lot of this in the scriptures. But we're looking at verse 34 and verse 35, which Matthew inserts this section in the middle of parables. The background is very simple. Chapter 12, of course, is a whole day. It's a day of conflict. It's a day when the disciples are getting into trouble with the Pharisees. Jesus is in trouble with the Pharisees. There are mean things being said. Pharisees are after Jesus. They get to the point that even criticize him for being full of the devil. Jesus is doing phenomenal miracles. Great ministry is happening. And yet the Pharisees are all upset. And time after time through the day, Jesus is giving them truth. He's saying this to them. He gives them theology. He gives them logic. He just keeps pouring truth out to them. They keep turning him off. They keep turning him down. Again, they have gone off. They have counseled how they're going to kill him. Not are we going to kill him. How are we going to kill him? They've already made up their mind. So they have totally shut him down. They aren't listening. They've turned their hearing aids off. They're sleeping during the services. They're just absolutely turned off. And they have decided not to follow or to accept or tune into anything that Jesus has to say. It's at night now. Jesus is lounging on the shores of Galilee, and while he's there, the crowd's all gathered in. Pharisees, no doubt, came as well. And Jesus began to preach to them, and he began to preach to them in parables. This is the first time. This is a whole different style of ministry. He's never done this before. It is so startling that the disciples are taken back by it and come to Jesus and say, hey, what on earth is going on? You're preaching things you've not preached before, a way you've not preached before. Your style has changed. And in verse 11 of chapter 13, Jesus begins to explain to them exactly why he was talking to them and preaching now in parables and why his style changed. And of course, the answer is given in the prophecy of Isaiah. And Jesus says in verse 14 that the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled in the Pharisees. So all the rejection, all the shutting down, all the turning off of the hearing aid, all the refusing to listen of the Pharisees is now fulfilling that which was in the prophet, given by the prophet Isaiah. And the prophecy was, hearing you will hear, shall not understand, seeing you will see, and not perceive, and the hearts of the people have grown dull. Their ears are hard of hearing, their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes, hear with their ears, lest they should understand with their hearts and turn, so that I would heal them. So that prophecy is fulfilled in the Pharisees. Then Jesus goes on and tells parables, as he has been. Explains the parable of the sower, gives the parable of the wheat and the tares, gives the parable of mustard seed, and down in verse 33 gives the parable of the leaven. Then Matthew inserts this section and says, I want to take you back to what I said before, only from a little different approach. It is true that the prophecy was a prophecy from Isaiah was fulfilled in the Pharisees. They fulfilled a prophecy. But I want you to know that Jesus, speaking in parables, also fulfills a prophecy. And he gives you verse 34 and 35. All of these things Jesus spoke to the multitudes in parables. And without a parable, he did not speak to them, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophet, saying, I will open my mouth in parables, I will utter things kept secret from the foundation of the world. Now, we started the concept of this passage with the idea of purpose. Do you see it? Verse 34. All of these things Jesus spoke to them, to the multitudes in parables, and without a parable. That doesn't mean his sermons were just parables, But it means that every time he spoke to them, he ended up with a parable in it. So sometime in all the preaching, every sermon Jesus preached, he ended up talking to them in parables. Without a parable, he did not speak to them. That purpose clause. Purpose clause. That. Why did he do this? That. Here's the purpose. It might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet. So Jesus, Isaiah says, hey, Pharisees fulfilled a prophecy, but I want you to know Jesus is fulfilling a prophecy as well. And he's speaking in parables to fulfill the prophecy. Now you'll remember the word plero is the word fulfilled. It's used often in terms of prophecies. In other words, when a prophecy is fulfilled, that's the word. It's the picture of a container, and you got content, and you take the content and you put it in the container, and the container becomes full. So here's the container of the prophecy. Jesus now is preaching in parables that fills up this prophecy and makes this prophecy complete. This prophecy is not going to be fulfilled in the future. We're not fulfilling this prophecy tonight. This prophecy was fulfilled. The container of the prophecy was filled up in that hour in chapter 13 when Jesus begins to talk in parables. Now, the minute you get into prophecy, purpose, now remember, what is the purpose of this fulfilling? Remember, prophecy always bespeaks God has a plan. Now, I got to keep myself under control because we're always talking about purpose. God has a purpose for your life, people. Come on, you got to get a hold of that. God has a purpose. God is not just doing things. God is not just lounging out. God is not just accomplishing this, that, the other, whatever. God doesn't operate on whims. God has, this prophecy was spoken hundreds of years before Jesus showed up. And now here it is. See, this is long range. God's plan for your life is long range. Do not live in the moment only. Live in the long range. This is not just what I can get by with today. This is what am I going to be another 20 years, 30 years, another 1,000,000 years from today? What is the plan? Where am I going? See, God has this overwhelming plan. That's always what prophecy is about. It's the plan. And God has laid out this phenomenal plan for your life. You don't want to miss his plan. Now, the minute you get into the prophecy, purpose of the parables, the minute you get into the prophecy, God has a plan. But God has a plan he's speaking, and it's being spoken in the parables. See, God is not silent about his plan. It isn't God has a plan. Well, yeah, but he doesn't tell me. Yes, he is. Not the whole plan. I got that. You couldn't handle it. I got that. He couldn't tell you all the details. I know. It'd scare you to death. Hey, I got that. But he's telling you the next step. Come on. So God is not silent regarding his plan. God's plan is spoken. That's what the parables are all about. And he's speaking his plan to you. Will you listen? Oh, will you listen? So you got purpose. Now, the second part of the concept that we spent a lot of time on was the parentage idea. There's the purpose, there's the parentage. Look at the next statement. This is out of the Old Testament, I will open my mouth. So where are the parables coming from? Well, from the mouth. Oh, but you got to remember that this is a play off of a whole teaching that Jesus gave to the Pharisees on that day. For instance, go back now to chapter 12 and look at verse 33. In verse 33, Jesus is in the middle of trying to say something to the Pharisees. Of course, they're shutting him down. They have just criticized him for being full of the devil. Said, oh, he does his miracles. He's in league with Beelzebub, the ruler of the devil. And Jesus, knowing what they were saying, hearing what they had saying, he came back and began to give this discourse. Now, the discourse is all about what? Trees. He uses the illustration of trees. He goes, come on, guys. Here you got good fruit. Don't come along and say, bad tree. Come on, if you got good fruit, you got good tree. If you got bad fruit, you probably got bad tree. So if the fruit is poisonous, the tree is poisonous. You can't mix that thing. Duh. So you come along and say, oh, your miracles are great. Wonderful. Hey, people are walking around who couldn't walk before. That's good. Oh, you're helping the poor people. That's good. Oh, you're feeding 5,000. Wonderful. Oh, you're doing all these good things, Jesus. But you got a rotten tree. You're full of the devil. He said, come on. You can't put that together, guys. If I'm full of the devil, then my activities must be full of the devil, because what's out here comes from what's in here. Don't mix that thing. Now, he says that's a nature example. And then he moves into verse 34 and says, for out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So what comes out of the mouth? Oh, what's in the heart? What's in the heart comes out of the mouth. In fact, he goes on in verse 35, a good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good things. An evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth evil things. Listen to yourself, and you'll know who you are, he says. But I say to you, for every idle word men may speak, they will give account of it in the day of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. So bring that whole concept that he just gave us into what he's saying here. I will open my mouth in parables. So if God is opening up his mouth in parables, where are the parables coming from? His heart. So if you want to know the heart of God, listen to the parable. Hear his voice and what he has to say. Because the origin, the birthing place of what God is saying in the parables of the kingdom is right out of his heart. So could I say to you, if God has this phenomenal plan, and if God is speaking his plan to you, where is that plan coming from? His heart. See, God didn't have a committee meeting, come up with what's best for the business, and then say, oh, who can we get? God is in love. And his heart is opened up, and the plan is spilling. The plan for your life is spilling out of the loving heart of an almighty God. He is your most passionate lover and has a plan. You don't want to miss it. Woo! Okay. Now, here's where we want to go tonight. The next statement. I will utter things. Well, that's the same thing he just said, I know. I will open my mouth. Okay, if you open your mouth, you will utter things. Duh. So it's a double statement, right? Well, sure. So what he said in I will open my mouth in parables is also what he's saying, I will utter things kept secret from the foundation of the world. So you got the same thing happening, only I will utter is a ramification of opening up your mouth. The Greek word, I don't know, I hope this won't be embarrassing. The Greek word for I will utter is ergomai. That's the Greek word, ergomai. And it literally means to, it's only used one time in the whole New Testament, it's right here, and it's a quote out of the Old Testament. So you find it in the Old Testament, but you don't find it in the New Testament except in the quote from the Old Testament. And it's a word that means belching vomit. Isn't this exciting? So there you sit and eat this food, and it just gets in your stomach, and you've just eaten so much that your stomach is creating this grumbling and this gas in your stomach, and it can't be contained, and it's out of your mouth. You belch. Now, in some cultures, you understand that's a compliment at the end of the meal. The louder you belch, the better the meal was. So let's all burp together. No, just kidding. That's this word. That God has got this thing going down inside of his stomach, in his gut level, in his internal part that is just grumbling and just moving, and he's so full of it, it just creates this atmosphere that just erupts. So this is not God saying, well, I guess I ought to say something, okay. See, this is not a casual message. I will open my mouth, okay. But see, there's not only then the purpose of this whole thing and the parentage of this whole thing, there's the power of this whole thing, which is all contained within the core of the existence of God, who absolutely is belching. It's impulsive, it's spontaneous. He cannot help himself in this speaking. So when God talks to you, it's because he has to. He can't help himself. He's not forced to it. It didn't come out of, well, I'm mad. It didn't come out of that. It came out of this fullness that's in God that just could not be contained, but is belching, burping out all over you. Never quite thought of God talking to me as a burp, but wow. It's an interesting concept, isn't it? Let's try to break that down. Origin. God is the source then of the speaking. Well, we've already said that, I know. God is the source of the speaking. The sovereign God himself is the one who is speaking. The minute you say that, that sets the boundaries for the speaking. Folks, this is not a, well, that's your opinion. This is my opinion. Well, you say, I say. Well, that's what they, but I don't. That's what that church, but this church don't. See, that's all gone now. Get out of that. This is not about an opinion. This is not about, well, you went to that school, I went to this school. Well, this is what you believe. This is what, no. What we're dealing with here is the sovereign God is speaking, and that means you're getting absolute truth from this that's coming out of him. That's phenomenal. So the origin of this is the sovereign God is speaking, and the sovereign God is desperately speaking because there is this inside thing in God that just boils up inside. It has a passion about it. It has an eruption about it. It goes on inside and just literally takes over God and just has to come out. He just cannot, he cannot contain it. He has to talk to you about truth. He has to come to you in truth. He has to. He cannot. He can't take a day off. He never says, well, I slept in that morning and didn't get there. See, a sovereign God has got this, which he cannot, he just has to talk to you. So he's desperately speaking to you, and bring it into our passage, this sovereign God is desperately got this thing that's speaking to you, and he's speaking to you in parables. Now that's the context of our passage. Well, what does that mean? He's speaking to me in parables. Well, the Pharisees have shut him down. He talked to them in theology, they shut him off. He talked to them in practical logic, they shut him down. He talked to them in argument, they shut him down. He talked to them by giving sign, they shut him down. Everything God came to and spoke to the Pharisees in ways God spoke to the Pharisees, he shut them down. Now he's coming to them in parables. In other words, God is so desperate to talk to you that he is going to find a way. He'll find a way. See, if you won't buy into theology, he'll get you with logic. If he doesn't get you with logic, he'll get you with argument. If he doesn't get you with argument, he'll demonstrate himself. If he can't get you by demonstrating himself, he moves into parables. If he can't get you by parables, would he stand back and let you shoot yourself in your foot? Would he let sin do all that it does to you? And whisper in the middle of it? Could you look at your life, where you are, what you're going through, and say, whoa, God is speaking to me? Because He is. And why is He? Because He's got this thing inside that just rumbles. It just, He can't just, and it just has to. And before He gets done, He will speak to you. Jesus, we have heard you. Yeah, I shut you down. Sure I did. Turned my hearing aid off. Sure I did. Sure I did. But you just keep speaking, don't you, God? You are so good at this, God, that you've got some of us to be here tonight and we don't even want to be. And yet here we are. You have this condition inside of overwhelming love and passion that just bubbles up inside and just burps out of your system, just cannot be contained. It just has to erupt out of your being and communicates to us. You have to do this, don't you? You're pressured. You're just after it. And you aren't going to quit. You're going to keep on talking to us. Oh God, I want to listen. Forgive me for my hardness, for my resistance, and break down my walls. Melt me, oh God. Oh sovereign God. It's not your opinion over against someone else for what other opinion would. Go beyond the babblings of some preacher tonight. Go beyond the lyrics of a song tonight. And woo us to yourself. Heads are bowed. The desperate actions of God are taking place in your life as He desperately wants to share His plan with you. Would you like to kneel at this altar and listen? Would you like to turn your hearing aid up and hear Him as never before? Would you risk just saying yes? Moments of seeking. Be obedient.